artificial intelligence. And my name is Rao Kamampati. That's my email address, rao@dsc.edu. And this is the home page for the course. And if you just say Rao cse571, you'll get the home page. You don't have to remember it, but that's where all the information on the course will be. And then my office hours are on the same days, Monday and Wednesday, 1 to 2 p.m. Okay, those are the regular office hours. If you can't make it at that time, and if you need to meet me, then you need to make appointments, email appointments, and then okay. So that's regarding the course. Okay, so mark-codation processes. Okay, so mark-codation processes are 4 tuples. You have states, actions, rewards, and what's T? The transition function. And we are going to learn about given a mark-codation process in terms of the states and the actions that the agent can do, the rewards those states provide, and the transition function, where the transition function is, so if you are in some state S, and then you do an action A, you might go into S1, S2, or S3, and then this may be 0.7 probability, this is 0.2, this is 0.1 probability. So I'm just writing this as TSA, S1 is 0.1, TSA, S2 is 0.2, TSA, S3, 0.7. So that's the transition function. Okay, and presumably we are also saying there's a reward. If an agent gets into a state, it gets an immediate reward for being in that state. Okay, and that reward is being given by the R function. And so you will assume that the rewards are real valued and positive and bounded. And you are essentially trying to gain more rewards. Presumably you want to get as much reward as you can by doing these actions. Okay, now what's the goal? There is no goal. Just collect rewards. Okay, and who wins? The agent that gets the most reward wins. Okay, which is more like life. Okay, so given that, the question is, what must the agent do? You know, this is not an observation. The agent isn't just looking at the world and seeing the world pass by. What is the choice the agent has here? What choice does the agent have? You have a life, right? What choice do you have? Do you get to decide what happens if you do an action? No.
Which action you perform.
You can decide what action you can perform. So the D part of MDP is you get to decide what action you want to perform. Given a state, what action would you perform? Okay, and in the solutions for mark-codation processes are called policies. And a policy essentially maps a state into an action. So if you're in this state, do this action. If you're in this state, do this action. Okay. If I have S number of states and I have A number of actions, in each of the states I can do A different actions. Right? A times A times A times S. So A power S, different policies are there, assuming discrete actions. So the question then is, which of these is the best policy? How are you going to pick? That's what mark coordination process is. Okay. Now, so I always wanted to start a course like this. So I did it today. Okay, no more, introduction, some slides and some pictures, etc. Just say X is a n tuple and see how many people still wait. And see if the class can be reduced in size so that we'll have, more breathing space. Partly, unfortunately, nobody seems to have left. I guess you've gotten good training. For graduate courses, you need to be able to follow what's going on. But anyway, this is what we will do at some point in today's class. Okay? But let me actually do a little bit of smaller introduction to the course. I really want to run this as a follow-on to Intro to AI. So I should have been able to continue this discussion and nobody leaving the class. That's what I really would like to do. So in some sense, so that we won't repeat stuff that's been probably covered already in Intro to AI courses. So the broad objectives of this course are deeper treatment of some of the cse571 topics. cse571 is the Intro to AI that's done here. More emphasis on tracking current state of art in AI, and possibly, depending on how things go, training for literature survey and independent projects. Because that depends to some extent on what sorts of students are taking this course. Okay, that we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so that's approximately what 571 is. The tricky part, of course, about 571 is that it's run differently by different professors. And probably some of you already know this. Because it's like Intro to AI is already, sort of reasonably standardized. 571 is run as just a special topics course by some, or follow on breadth by others. And I'm trying to do follow on breadth rather than just one specific topic. The areas that I work in AI are automated planning, which has connections to MDPs, and also information integration, which is also something else that we might get to. Those are my areas, but I'm not running it as a special topics course. I'm trying to run it more as a next breadth in AI, with more emphasis on what's actually being very useful currently in AI research. Okay. So this is the current class makeup. I don't even know whether all of them are there. I mean, the last I checked, there are 46 students registered. 15 are PhD, 22 are MS, 8 are MCS, and there even is one undergraduate student. Okay. Now, of course, I understand that the course seats are at a premium, and that somebody told me that students have established a Facebook group wherein they hold on to some seats in some course until some other courses become available. And I'm hoping that many of them will leave this course, because don't take this course because you need to fill your program. You will regret it, I'll regret it. Okay, take it because you really wanted to take it. So I'm actually thinking, because this year in particular, we do have this issue that we have a large number of incoming grad students, and so there aren't that many seats in all the courses apparently, and so there's a lot of mad rush for seats. So I assume that I really have no clue as to who's going to be in this class until after Thursday, okay, when drop ad is over. So I'm not going to seriously design the course in terms of grading, etc. Until Thursday is over. Okay, seriously, because for example, if all the MS and MCS students go away, and nothing against them, then it's a different kind of a class. It's a more PhD level class. Okay, whereas if all the PhD students go away, then I'll feel very sad, but it's a different class, right? Right? And so I'm kind of going to wait until Thursday, but we will continue doing our discussions, etc. But as to exactly how the grading and what sorts of things we'll wind up doing depends to some extent on who actually winds up being there. Good old days, people actually show up here, they are in the class, but that's no longer true. Okay, I did check to see how many of the people actually are serious. I tried to send a survey, and this is the survey results. I think only 33 people actually responded to the survey. That maybe is what are here, maybe some of them. So that will give you an idea of, that will give me an idea of how to run the course, and will also give you an idea of what the population who registered for this course are hoping for. So this tells you that about 12 out of 33 have not taken any AI course whatsoever. They just like AI because presumably New York Times every day has an article about AI, which is true, by the way, right? I mean, one of the nice things of computer science is you don't need to read textbooks. You can just read New York Times, and then they'll keep telling you what's going on in computer science. And many of them are about AI. You know, obviously there's a lot that's going on. So I could decide to tell people who haven't done Intro to AI to leave the class, but I think it's a graduate level class. You only have 3 courses. You have tons of time. That's the way I would like to believe. Okay, you have tons of time and only 3 courses. Okay, and so you can make up for anything if you want. Okay, so if you are taking this course and you are not one of those people who does not have Intro to AI, spend time, learning as and when needed. You don't need to complete the entire course before I start the first lecture here, but there are several topics as I start, there will be topics that would be relevant. You can see it based on the connections I'll be making. I would act as if all of you were with me in spring when we did the Intro to AI course, and only a few of you here are there. But I'll act that way. And based on that, you can figure out what you need to actually pick up. And if you know that material from somewhere else, fine. If not, pick it up. Okay, it's not that hard to pick it up, especially for the Intro to AI course. I have the entire course online. Okay, the entire course, every possible lecture, everything in audio, video, every format. And so this is basically what we did in Intro to AI. Right? And all the videos are available. So if there's a topic that I'm talking about, that I'm assuming you know the information, and you don't, you can just go back and either read the textbook, which is what lots of people do, or look at the videos. And if you don't like my face, look at somebody else's videos. Right? That's fine too. Okay? So that's what I'm planning to do because it's a graduate class, and I'm not here to police you. We are supposed to provide you as much of a rope as you want, and you decide what to do with the rope. Remember, this man said, you have choice with your actions. You can use the rope to hang yourself, or do something interesting. Right? Okay. Okay, so that's regarding the background on the AI courses. So I am going to act, in difference to people who did do Intro to AI, I don't want to repeat everything. I don't want to start with the A-star searches kind of thing, but because it just wastes their time. But you can always go back and pick up if you don't have that information. And I'm not going to throw people out of the class myself. Okay. So then I asked about list of topics from last time so that you will know. That's one way of figuring out, giving you an idea as to what might get done in this course. Right? That's what I was doing. And then at least these 33 people looked at the list of topics from 571 as I did last time. Let's see if I could pick it up here. So right now it's sort of gone down to the fall 10 notes, and those are the topics we wound up doing. Introduction, deterministic planning, mark-coordination processes, stochastic planning, planning in grid space, form DPs, reinforcement learning, statistical learning, temporal probabilistic models. Those were what I wound up doing the last time I did this class, which was 2 years back, in fall 2010. Okay, and I said, basically, do any of these things make sense to you? Do you want a do you have some sort of a interest in any specific topics? And if none of these are interesting to you, or if you want more topics, can you suggest names? And so I got all that information. I didn't put everything here. But the popular topics, it turns out, are MDPs, belief space planning, statistical learning, and reinforcement learning. Okay? I completely assume that you know what you're asking for. And so that, in fact, we will be doing those. And as I said, in fact, today, assuming that I get done with the introductory spiel, I will start doing mark coordination processes. But I'll try to make connections to mark coordination processes with respect to intro to AI. Why are we interested in them? That's something that we will get in the first slide. Okay. List any other topics people are interested in. There was no obvious pattern. Different people said different things. I will make this available to the class. The people who are looking at their cell phones during the class, please don't do it. Okay. There's lots of place to look at the cell phone. I also have one, by the way. It's not much to look at, but I decide to look at your face. Okay. There is no obvious patterns to what people wanted to be done. I will make those comments available with names removed. I know that I have the names, so for reasons that will become clear to you in a minute, I wouldn't remove the names. I will know who said what, but you will at least know I didn't make up this stuff. Okay. Any special reason for taking course? If people said that doesn't matter as far as you're concerned for the class. And then I asked this question, as you can see, there are videos from 571 available, and then every day CNN keeps talking about flipped classes and how people are having great fun having flipped classes. And so you watch the video, and I, will do some problem solving in the class. Should we do it that way, or do you want to go with traditional lectures? And obviously I grew up with normal lectures. But I thought I should give it a try, since you're all people who are in the online world. Surprisingly, there is apparently a lot of job security for me, because while the rest of the world apparently believes in massively online open courses, ASU people want traditional lectures. It's like by far the big majority. Okay, the reasons are all not pure as driven snow. Some people directly said, hey, I'm going to waste my time watching the video before coming to the class. I'm just going to spend 1.5 hours per class. That's it, no more. Okay. That is not a very good answer, especially since you gave the name. But at some point of time, people forgot it's not anonymous. But anyway, unless you gave your friend's name. But in a graduate level course, I'm assuming, again, I have this view, I'm telling you up front, I have this view that first year grad students have infinite amount of time. Okay? And they pick the things that they're interested in doing, and they're going to do it right. That's my model. You can try to convince me otherwise. Okay? On the other hand, undergrads probably have 6 courses, and they have 8 jobs on the side, making minimum wages. Many of you probably don't need to make minimum wages, okay? And so I'm assuming that grad students have a lot of time, and they only take the class that they're interested in, and they'll spend a lot of time. You don't have to do lots of classes.
And screw the singular undergrad in the class.
Okay, that's a whole entire situation. We'll talk about it later. That is for the being, I guess, ahead of the game. Okay. So it looks like I do have job security. People want more lecture-oriented. The maximum people said is something like, maybe we'll try it every 4 or 5 classes. You can sort of discuss. I think people are really worried that if you have to discuss, they have to ask questions. Whereas it's so much simpler this way. I talk and you listen. Plus, you already paid your tuition, so somebody else should do the work, heavy lifting, not you, right? Right. So that there, of course, goes also, unfortunately, my dream of running a Real Genius style class. How many of you have seen Real Genius? The movie. First homework, okay? Without using BitTorrent clients. Find out about Real Genius and watch the movie. It's a hilarious movie for people in engineering. And then there is this, in the beginning of the, this is set in a university, and at the beginning of the lecture, beginning of the movie, there is this one shot where they show the classroom. There's a huge lecture hall, and there's a large spool tape recorder. This is 80s, early 80s, late 70s movie. So there is a large spool tape recorder of recorded lecture droning on and on and on, and then the cameras, pans, and you see a huge number of small micro tape recorders taking it down directly. I always wanted that so that we can be doing more useful things. I record my lectures you bring your own video recorders and we be done. We can cut ourselves out of the mix. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen apparently this time. So it'll be more sort of lecture oriented because at least, unless I check again after Thursday, but it looks like there is a general interest in keeping it more traditional. I did not know. Maybe this is part of being graduate students. Slowly you become conservative and you want tradition and family values. And but anyway, so that's the answer. So more or less it's going to be lecture oriented with some discussions. That's what it's going to be like. Okay. And I also asked, do you want structured projects or quasi-self-defined semester projects for the class? And the best answer is, I'm not sure, probably not. I don't know what that means. But that's not a good answer, it turns out. You have to pick one. And mostly people wanted structured projects. Okay. Once again, that's slightly disappointing, but that's okay. I mean, I guess there are many people who are just in the very first year of the graduate program and they probably want some structure. So what we'll try to do, depending on how the class mix winds up, in the beginning at least there would be a couple of structured projects. For example, there'll be one on MDPs and then probably one on the next topic that we do. And then depending on how adventurous and ambitious and enterprising the remaining 3 people look, we will decide to go. Probably, I think, for the last project, we will try to make it sort of a mini-term project where you get to decide what you do. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. Okay, as I said, I didn't spend too much time trying to put this thing in set in stone because I don't quite know. I mean, the setup is quite big mix of PhD and MS students. Okay, so the reading materials, most of them will be drawn from Russell and Norvig, but then I get to sometimes draw from other places, and then I'll give you links to them. I can't necessarily copy them, but I'll give you links to them, and then you'll just have to pick up. And then sometimes we'll read papers, tutorial papers from the magazines and so on. Okay, that's what the reading is going to be. But you should, if you have done Intro to AI, those of you who done Intro to AI, I hope you, held on to that book and didn't sell it off to Amazon, because now it's going to turn back and sell it to you for double the price, and that would not have been good. Okay, so this is certainly worth having. That's the closest to a single textbook for this course. Okay. Any questions until this? Yes, sir.
Maybe you're going to wait on this, but you're thinking of having a project that's big enough to count towards project-based master's degree? So 30%. I do not play that game, unfortunately, because I know they have this rule. I think if you were to do these projects, and if you actually do the course, then you come, I can tell people, whoever wants to hear that these are good projects, that's fine. Okay. But I'm not going to necessarily decide 30% for one project, one project such that it can be counted towards the MCS. This is again different objectives. Different people have different objectives, right? I mean, some people are interested in just learning the material. Some are interested in learning this material because they're doing a particular type of research for which this material will be useful. And some are interested in just getting a course, and so we'll just hopefully deal with Okay. For the grading, as I said, I have not really put everything in stone yet, said anything in stone yet. As I said, ask me again on next Monday if you're here, and then we'll have more, serious discussion about exact percentages, etc. But my current thinking is we'll have some problem sets, which might involve mini projects as part of the problem sets, and then we'll have a midterm and possibly a final. Okay, I said possibly a final because if there's going to be a big term project, then we might decide not to have a midterm final. That's what it's going to be. And I'm hoping that people will participate in the class very actively, and then I'll provide like forums for discussing topics and so on. I hope that will happen. So participation counts, and those two plus certain graduate level assessment types, that I'm going to decide based on who actually winds up being there. These will include reading assigned chapters and papers and submit reviews on them before you come to the class, so that I know you learned how to read state-of-the-art papers. State-of-the-art papers look like my first slide, okay? Because they're given 6 pages, so they're not going to say, hi, my name is X, and how are you, etc. That's already 2 pages. You only have 4 pages left. So they're going to start with definitions right away, more or less, okay? And so it's good to be able to, one of the advantages of one of the premises of taking graduate course is you can then do research in that area. And the only way you will believe me is if you can read some papers from, AI conferences. So I'll at least make sure that a couple of times you'll have opportunity to read probably the papers from this year's AAAI, the one that just got done, like a month back, okay? And then you can sort of make sense of, like for example, there's MDPs, which will be the first topic we'll be looking at. There's a whole bunch of papers on MDPs in this year's AAAI. And you can pick one, or I'll pick one and make you guys read it and then comment on it. Right? That way you'll sort of figure out whether you understood enough to kind of make sense of what those people are doing in terms of exchange. Okay? So that's one type of graduate level endowment. Then I might consider doing presentations, although I'm not sure that's likely to happen. I think the likelihood of this reduces, as you go. And work on a full-term project, although this one probably, as I said, we might have last project that you get to decide. Okay? That's about grading. Any questions right now? Like I said, this is not completely set in stone, but it does give you enough of a background as to what's going to happen. The last time I did this course, I just actually assumed that they're all PhD students and this business of grading is only for kids and really you're here to learn. And then I found that they didn't learn anything. So they also thought learning is for kids. But anyway, so I thought I made it a little more, I'm thinking of making it a little more structured with some problem sets and so on. Okay, that's where you want to be. Okay. Last time we actually had a single semester long project and people came up with proposals, etc. But that also didn't necessarily work all that well. It depends. Those kinds of things work well. One of the interesting things is that we are told essentially that in undergraduate course you more or less try to take the entire class with you, and in graduate level course you take whoever is coming with you. Okay, and so if you keep up, you keep up. If not, no, you're graduate. You're supposed to figure out. Okay, so there are a couple of people who did good projects, and that's good. But I'm hoping that that overall wasn't a big enough success in my view, because people are not mature enough to pick their own projects yet. So that's why this time we're going to do more. And since you also said structured, last time when I asked this question, everybody said semester-long project that we decide. And apparently in 2 years people have changed, and so they're saying structured projects. That may be just MCS students, but that's a different story. Okay, that's where the grading part is. Any questions? Okay. So now we go, that's all about administrative stuff, about cse571. Now I'm going to do 2 things in the remaining part of the class. The first thing is to sort of give you a quick stratospheric view of what sort of gets done in 471. Truly stratospheric view, okay? And then why we are going to do, and then we jump into MDPs, okay? And there I'll explain to you why MDPs are kind of interesting and different enough from what was done in, Intro to AI, okay? So that you sort of have some high-level view as to what these models are and why they're not done in Intro to AI, and what sort of other things got done in Intro to AI, okay? So this is my AI picture. This is the robot, and it's looking at the world, and it has some goals, and it wants to achieve them. Okay, and it gets to work on the environment by using actions. That's how you change the state of the environment. And it gets a state of the environment by its sensors, the perception. Okay, and so keep doing actions, keep looking at the environment until you see you have reached the goal, for example. Okay, having said that, it turns out that, so there are actions, there are environments, and there are perceptions, and this is the first day of Intro to AI stuff, but I'm just sort of repeating for you that, part of the difficulty of designing this agent depends to some extent on the nature of actions it has access to, the nature of environments it has to work in, the amount of sensors it has, the kinds of perception it has, and also the kinds of goals it has. Okay, and in particular we mentioned at that time, and you may have thought about it in Intro to AI, that, for example, actions can be either deterministic or stochastic. Okay, deterministic means you do the action, you know exactly what would be the state of the world after you do this action. So the entire thing can be done in your head. So I know that I'm in S1, I will do action A5, I know I will be in S7. So then I will be in S7, I will do action A9, I will be in S15. So I keep doing this in my head until suppose I need to reach, S95 where my goals are satisfied. I keep thinking this up, dreaming about states and actions until I hit S95. As soon as I hit S95, I see what actions I did and do them in the forward direction. That's what agents are supposed to do. That's basically planning. Thinking before acting is planning. Okay? Now, if your actions are deterministic, this search is hard, but not too hard. If they're stochastic, what happens is, I know I'm in S5, if I do action A1, I might be, if I do this action, I might be in S1 or S2 or S3. But I don't know which one I will be for sure. There are only probabilities associated with it. Okay, and then maybe if I'm lucky enough and I go to S3, then if I do some action, then I'll get into some other set of states. So basically the combinatorics explode much faster with stochastic actions. Right? Now in fact, even in the case of stochastic actions, it turns out there are two types of stochastic actions. By the way, actually, in fact, when I say actions, the first question is, if you just got into the world, so deterministic basically is, deterministic actions means I know exactly what state will happen. Stochastic action means I'll know which of the states will happen and what probabilities. Even less knowledge would be non-deterministic actions. These states will happen, but I don't know what probabilities. Finally comes no clue, no model. Okay, I do this action and I hope for the best. If I'm still alive, I'll do another action. Right? And so basically when we are talking about this, we were assuming that actions are somehow given by somebody. Right? That's true for many of you right now. But imagine when you were a little kid. Okay, you had no idea, you had effectors, these flailing arms, and then you know that everything, you just try to put your hand on it, and then if you can pick it, put it in your mouth. Those things are built in, and some of you basically who have been in stabilized environments didn't put in bad things in your mouth, so they're still here. Okay, the other people probably are not here. Okay, so you lived long enough that you learned your action models. You understand what I'm saying? So the idea here is, while you can go from here to here and say, this place planning is easy, this is harder. Okay, so if you, let me write this down. When is planning easy? I have deterministic actions. Very easy. Not very easy, actually. It turns out, those of you who remember from Intro to AI, the simplest planning turns out to be p-space complete. By the way, AI is a computer science discipline. It's not philosophy, it's not cognitive science, it has connections to them. We eventually, at the end of the day, we have to write algorithms, which have to run. So we can't just say, I wrote some kind of a code and sometimes it works. Okay? And so you need to understand the complexity upfront. Okay? So we will talk about what are hard problems. Okay? So the hardness, before you came here, polynomial, there is NP complete, p-space complete is above it. Okay? And so these are the hardest computations that you can do when given only polynomial amount of space. Okay? And so for example, any depth first search can be done with polynomial amount of space, if you remember. Because depth first search remembers the open list B times D, and so it can be done in polynomial amount of time. So anything which can just be done with simple depth first search kind of an algorithm is still inside of p-space. And p-space complete are the hardest algorithms, in the hardest problems in that class. Okay? And planning with deterministic actions is p-space complete. Okay? And then you get to stochastic. That means, well, it's not exactly that you will get to S1, you might get to S1, S2, or S3, and these are the probabilities. Okay? And then of course the complexity here increases. Okay? Then you get to non-deterministic. In the case of non-deterministic, you essentially know the states, but you don't know the probabilities of getting into them. Okay, so you have even less knowledge. So you need to, so if you are in a non-deterministic world, the first time you do planning, it's hard. But if you have a brain and it learns, then after a few times, you won't keep still staying in non-deterministic worlds. You learn probabilities and you get to stochastic. Okay? And then you learn more than probabilities. You will actually learn better models and might even get deterministic. It turns out, for example, that if you don't know what variables actually affect what variables, you know, we come up with all sorts of silly theories of how the world works the first time around. Okay? And you think only our foreparents, ancestors did it, but we do it all the time. Right now, we're doing it for biology. We say, you know, X and Y, if you take these things, maybe if you take coffee, either I'm dying or not dying, or becoming smarter or not becoming smarter, or whatever you have. Okay? And because we have no clue, actually, what is the true model of what coffee's effect is on one's life. Right? And then we get to make fun of our ancestors who used to actually have this really complicated model of the universe with Earth set in the middle. Center, because Pope said so. So we must put Earth in the middle. And if any time, based on that model, many things would not be correctly predictable, so we'll say probabilistically, you know, moon will be once in a while here, once in a while there. It's not that the moon's rotation around Earth is uncertain, it is your understanding that's incomplete. Sometimes incompleteness becomes uncertainty. Okay? So actually, as you learn from stochastic, you can actually become deterministic. And sometimes, of course, if you believe in quantum uncertainty, there are certain levels beyond which you can never become deterministic. So how much ever learning you do. Okay, so there's non-deterministic, and above non-deterministic is what model? Okay, I know the action, but I have no clue what they do. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to do anything. That's how you came into this world, right? You had effectors, and you're going to use them. By God, you're going to use them. You know, you're going to put your hand on every nice red thing. If it is a stove, you will learn something useful. Okay? And if it's an apple, you learn something useful too. Okay? And part of being good parents is to remove all the hot stoves and put lots of apples in front of the kids. You know, because social services don't necessarily take the argument that we didn't do anything. We just put these things, and the kid went and took the gun, and then, you know, NRA anyway. But so the point being that you would essentially learn the models if you don't have the models. So when I'm looking at this, you have two problems. One is, given what I gave you, you have to deal with it to decide what your actions are. That's the inference. When you don't have the model, the inference is going to be harder. Okay? When you have non-deterministic, it will be a little less hard. Stochastic, a little less hard. Deterministic, somewhat less hard. And then the other issue is, just because you've been given a model or not given a model, you're not just going to sit around doing nothing. You, the agent, is going to learn a better model. Because as you are working in the world, you're getting experiences and you're improving your actions, action models. What kind of learning is that? Why did the kid not, most reasonable kids, don't put their hand twice on a hot stove that's red?
Reinforcement learning.
Reinforcement learning. We gave the poor kid really strong reinforcement. Don't ever do it again. Okay, and of course, you know, in the good old days without social services, we also could give all sorts of crazy reinforcements. You know, you didn't study, we're going to slap you. And that's bad reinforcement. And so you will supposedly learn good behavior by being subjected to all sorts of punishments. Okay, but that's reinforcement learning. That's where the learning comes, essentially. So if you are learning the action models, then you can go from here to here to here to here down. Okay? So I'm just sort of trying to put the words that you saw there, you know, even for those of you who have taken Intro to AI, some of this might be slightly new because it's not obvious that models may not be there to begin with and that you learn. Okay? And one of the interesting things, of course, is the expectations as to what is success. If you have a boss, the boss is going to expect, if the boss gave you a deterministic model of the world, and you did some random thing and said, yeah, you know, what can I do? Then they will find somebody else to do the job. Whereas if your boss didn't give you any model and said, do the best, and you did something reasonable, they're not necessarily going to fire you. Why? Because we have an expectation as to what is the maximum you can do if you have no model. Especially if you are in a world where certain actions will kill you, will just make you know more. It's like that Monty Python sketch, you know, it's an X-parrot or an X-agent, right? If there's an X-agent, then there are no more actions left, right? Okay, and so no point in saying, well, you know, I'm going to remove you. Of course, you may as well remove that person because they're dead, you know, get somebody else. But the important thing is if you don't have models, you don't actually expect miracles to happen. So the best anybody can expect is, are you able to exploit the knowledge that you've been given? Therein lies a conundrum, which is, if you increase your model, then you will know, we'll know that you have more knowledge, and then we expect more from you. So, if you are a lazy bum, then you may not want to get a really good model of the world, because nobody expects anything from you. I don't know nothing, and so we can't expect you to do anything. Okay? Because in fact, inference is easier if you have no model, because anything is a reasonable thing to do. If you have no idea how the world works, any action is a reasonable action. If you are given the full model, then I can still throw it out and say, I don't want to use it. I act as if there is no model. And then the inference would be easy. Do you see what I'm saying? The inference would be easy. So who are you kidding? Of course yourself. Because other people will know that you've been given the knowledge that you're not using. Am I making this whole thing up which has no connection to computation? No, actually this has significant connection to computation. We will see that one way people try to solve MDPs, which is basically planning with stochastic actions, is to sort of ignore probabilities. One idea might be, say, okay, so you say this is 0.7, 0.2, 0.1. I'll act as if these don't exist. I'll act as if this is just a deterministic action which mostly does just S3. Many a time I'll be fine. And if I'm wrong, I'll say, wait, made a mistake, let me change my action. You replan. And you can get by or by. When can you do this as an agent? What technical properties should your world have such that you get to say, I made a mistake, let me try once more. Backtrack, yeah, backtrack is a search term. You are on the right track, but it's a search term. Backtracking is what you do in your head, but if you're doing it in physical world, you should be able to come out, basically, that's what you're saying. You have to be able to come out of a state. There are certain states that love you so much that they won't let you get out of them. They're called sink states. Death is one of them, unless, you know, you have your favorite religious document which tells you what happens after death. Okay, right? Death is a sink state. What happens in a sink state? If you do an action from that sink state, you will still be in that state. Okay, now if you have sink states, then saying, let me try once more doesn't help, because you are saying, let me try once more, nobody can hear you, you're dead. Did you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so there is a nice term for this. You can say no sink state world. No sink state world. In fact, there's actually, the bigger point there is that wherever you are, you should be able to reach any other state of the world with some probability. Maybe exceedingly low, but some probability. If you do have that property, then your world is a good world. You can try actions, and if they don't work out, you can try some more actions until you get safe. So a world where every state can be reached from every other state with finite probability, non-zero probability, is called an ergodic world. An ergodic world. It's a happy world. Okay? So if there's nothing you remember from today's class, remember that if you ever become a parent, as a parent, your main duty is to make your living room ergodic for your kids. You see what I'm saying? If it's not ergodic, then bad. They don't get to try any more actions and learn anything about their world. Ergodic, okay, little boo-boo, hopefully we'll put some ointment and then it'll be fine. Tomorrow you can be on your feet again trying stuff. Okay, so that also tells you that the real world is not ergodic. Think of this poor guy who went to Alaska and took nice pictures of the bear. We got to see them. He didn't get to see them. Although it's a digital camera, he must have seen before he went away. But he got eaten. Right? Obviously, none of you read CNN the way I do, I guess. But CNN completely ignores the real news and tells you all these kinds of useful stuff, which is important for classes. Right? So, Alaska, it turns out, is not ergodic. Sarah Palin did not convert Alaska into an ergodic place. Right? Real world is not ergodic. So in real world, if you don't have models, you pay for it with your life. And your robot will pay for it with its life. It will fall down and can't get up. That's where the models come in. That's why you want to learn models. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, so the point is, if you don't have any models, then why can't I just keep doing actions and say, sorry, it didn't work, I'll try one more thing. And that doesn't work because in the real world, you may get into states from which you can't come out. But the worlds that you make for your kids can be artificially ergodic. That's what civilization has been all about. People used to go from their home to the grocery store and get eaten by a tiger. I mean, in some parts of Sundarbans in Bengal, that still happens. And so people have like a tiger face in the back of their head so that the tiger won't eat them. Apparently tigers don't like tigers. So there is non-ergodic, incident there in terms of going to just marketplace. Okay? But mostly in Tempe, it's okay. Unless, there are people with guns and stuff. But mostly we have stabilized our environments so that we made it more and more ergodic. Okay? So that's about actions. Just that little part is about actions. Okay? And then you can learn the model. When somebody says, do you have the model of the world? This is what they mean. Do you know what are the states? Do you know what are the actions? Do you know what happens if you do an action in a state? That's what they mean. So when there's a very technical meaning for models in AI. A model of the world is the dynamics of the world. What state, what are the states, what are the actions, and how do states go to other states when you do the actions? Yes?
What does intensiveness versus geodetic mean?
Okay, so that's a different point. Actually, I just spent all this time just for this, by the way. So this is stochastic, deterministic, and non-deterministic, and no model. Okay, those are the three things. Those are the four things that can be here. I mean, this picture is done as if somebody wrote the models of the world, and but sometimes the models may not have been written. And then anyway, so the other thing about actions is there are other issues about actions. Are they instantaneous actions? That means as soon as you do the action, you will in the next instant you will be in the next state. Or are they durative actions? That means you start doing this action, the action itself takes its own sweet time, and by the time it ends, then it will have the effects that you expect it will have, and that might be too late. Again, which one is more like real world?
Durative.
Durative actions. Which one is easier to think in your head? Instantaneous actions. One of the nice things about instantaneous actions is if you have deterministic and instantaneous actions. Yes, sir.
Oh, I was just curious. When you say derivative action, are you still referring to a discrete step, or are you referring to?
Yes, that's a very good point. Actually, in fact, you could also talk about continuous versus discrete. Okay. Most of what we have been discussing till now are discrete state spaces. That's yet another level of complexity, continuous versus discrete. We will mostly tend to focus on discrete here. It's not because continuous worlds are not interesting, they are, but you need a different kind of a background to make a lot of sense of continuous worlds, which EE people have. There may be a couple of EE people, somebody asked me, I guess they didn't show up. But EE people have, but that signal processing techniques and so on, that would be very useful for continuous. Okay, so one of the interesting things, just think about this little picture and see if you are able to follow this. If you have deterministic actions and they are instantaneous, I argue that your plan, you have a plan. By the way, this is a beautiful, beautiful semester to talk about plans, right? Because it's one of the rare times when Americans care about plans before presidential primaries. My plan is better than your plan. You have no plan. I have some plan. And your plan is only 15 pages long. Mine is 95 pages long. And then they get elected, no plans. We react. Right? Model-free governance. But this is a great semester because it's all about, you are essentially deciding between two different people, based on their plans. Right? And so the plan for a deterministic action with instantaneous deterministic actions, I argue that plans will always be just pure sequences of actions. A plan will always be like this: A7, followed by A9, followed by A25, followed by A13, stop. It will always be a sequence of actions. If it is durative, that's not true. Even if it's deterministic. Right? Why? Because you can be doing actions concurrently with other actions. Right? So for example, as you are in the class, you are doing other things, other actions. And that's because being in the class action is durative, sometimes really, really long durative. It looks like it's eternal. But, you're doing, that's why you do other important things like cell phones, sleeping, etc. And you're being concurrent. Yes?
So, even when you're talking about instantaneous and deterministic actions, there are certain domains where it's useful to have concurrent actions.
Yes. That's basically those we call temporal domains, temporal planning. So instantaneous, deterministic, okay, so you're talking about, even if you have instantaneous, you may want to do concurrent. That's just parallelism. It turns out all those plans can still be written like these. So for example, in database terminology, those of you who have taken some databases, you might see that all transactions have to be serializable. You may do them parallelly, but there should be some serialization order with respect to which you check the semantics. All serializations must have the same effect. In that case, you get to just check in the serialized orders and then improve efficiency by making them more parallel.
But there are still some domains which you can model as instantaneous and deterministic, which aren't serializable. Like, for instance, two robots, they have to lift up a table together without tipping it.
That winds up, okay, that's an very interesting point. Actually, lifting of this. Talk to me afterwards. Okay, first the 2 points. One is that actually lifting of the table is durative. Okay, and I'll show you somebody whose PhD thesis in my lab, Will Cushing, is this, and he would have a great argument with you, and it'll be fun for you. Okay. About whether or not instantaneous actions do have parallelism. To some extent, at a theoretical level, you are right. Okay. But so that's about instantaneous and durative. About the environments. The environments are what you are looking at. You have an action, everything works in theory. Does it work in practice? That's the question. Models of the actions are about, does it even work well in theory? Because plans are made in your head. Plans are made in your head. Or your agent does search before it even starts executing. And then it starts executing it in the world. The question then is, does it know whether the plans it's doing are having intended effect? If the world is deterministic, right, then does it even care? No, because I tell you, you're going to be in S5, you need to be in S15. Do a plan, and then you'll think about it and say, okay, do A7, A9, A15, A45. And then that's it, you will be sure that you will be in the goal state. I don't need to open my eyes, it's kind of unnecessary strain on the eyes. These are deterministic, and you told me what my initial state is. I will be in the goal state, according to the model you gave me, or at least the one that I learned. Okay, but if it's not deterministic, and if it's not, there are two issues. The one is deterministic, the other is static. When I am making my plan, is the environment waiting for me to, do my action on it, or is it evolving by itself? And if it's evolving by itself, then by the time you are ready with your plan, it's too late. And that's what happens for most of the time for plans. The world is dynamic. If the world is dynamic, it could be basically because there are other agents which change the world other than yourself. So that's where multi-agency comes in, multiple agents working in the world. And so when you are not doing anything, somebody else is doing something. And so you don't have the state you expected. Okay, so obviously static worlds are happy because they'll wait until you're done with your thinking. Dynamic worlds are hard. And then if you are in dynamic worlds, at least you are, if you have non-deterministic actions, that means you don't have deterministic predictable states after each action, then you need to actually open your eyes to see where you are. So for example, I have a complete model of tossing a coin. If I toss a coin, it will come either heads or tails. And 0.5 is the probability for a fair coin. But I have to actually see which one came. If it is heads, I do something, tails something else. So I need to actually look at the environment. So once it's not deterministic and it's not static, you start needing sensing. You need to look at the world. Okay? And then when you are looking at the world, it depends on whether you got good sensors. If you bought cheap cameras, it'll give you like washed out pictures. If you buy sonar, it might give you all sorts of, things that don't exist, in the room. So, for example, at AAAI, Google guys were showing the current status of their car. They have done 250,000 miles in San Francisco. San Francisco, as if it isn't enough that it has San Andreas Fault running right through it, and it might actually fall into the ocean. Now also has Google cars without drivers going around. Okay, and so they have done like 250,000 miles or something till now, and everything is fine most of the time. In fact, they showed this video of this car going on the most crooked street. How many of you have been to San Francisco most crooked street? The car does that fine. And Sebastian Thrun was saying that he lives like 4 hours away from Google. He has like a vacation home. And then basically he finds it's very relaxing for him. I guess probably not for the other drivers on the road. To just sort of hang around while the car goes. Doesn't have to drive at all. And all of us will be in this nice place after a while. But he also showed, so then people said, 250,000 miles, why don't we start using them, right? And then he said, well, there are little issues. Such as, for example, how many times have you seen a grocery bag just flying in front of your car? This is peculiar in cultures which have plastic bags, right? And also have wind outside. And so a grocery bag flies out, you don't duck. Car doesn't have to duck, right? You just go through it. But apparently, unfortunately, given their great sensors, a grocery bag flying in front of the Google car looks exactly like a deer flying in front of the Google car. And here is, a practical piece of information. If you see a deer flying in front of your car, you do want to duck, do want to stop, right? Because they're pretty darn heavy. I had a friend who hit a deer, and deer didn't like it, but his car got totaled also. Okay, so there are all these issues. Now, Google couldn't have good sensors that can differentiate between a plastic bag flying and a deer flying. And they are pouring a lot of money into it. And when they're actually bringing it to the market, I'm pretty sure they'll put cheap sensors, and you and I will be seeing all sorts of things. At least our cars will be seeing all sorts of things. So the point I'm trying to make is when you talk about perception, perception is about the simple question: what state is the environment currently in? That's the question. Okay? And if you have perfect perception, you should be able to say S97. That's the state. No more, no less. Environment is in a unique state at this point of time. You know, what is it? S97. If you have perfect perception. If you have no perception, and you know that the environment can be in one of states 1 to a million. If you have no perception and I ask you what state is the environment in, you can answer. You can say it's in one of these 1 million states. Uncertainty. Not being able to see means you see a lot of things. Not the correct thing, but multiple states look equivalent suddenly with respect to the faulty sensing you have. So for example, it's very interesting to me that as a teacher I stand and I play this game, at least for undergrad courses, since none of your undergrads I can say, I won't get sued, that I try to seed students as to who seem to be understanding best. Just looking at their facial expressions, presumably, because I'm human and I'm trained to look at people's faces. Okay? And we tend to think that people who are looking at you with a lot of interest must be getting everything that you're saying. That's unfortunately not true. And I relearn it every semester. Right? I'll think this person will do best, this person will maybe doing not very best, etc. And then, of course, I don't, and I'm still have my job, so I don't actually make it happen. I'll actually look at what they wrote, and many a time the correlation is nowhere near perfect. Why? Because I don't have a good sensing equipment. My sensing equipment really needs to see what's happening in your brain. Instead, your face comes in the way. I see your face. And then I think, I try to kind of decide what your brain state is based on your facial state. Okay, and to put this back in even more perspective, I had a professor in Maryland, his name is Naveen Kanal, great guy. I didn't know at that time, but essentially he had some condition because of which he used to fall asleep during mid-sentence. And he would come to the class and fall asleep. And he came to my MS thesis defense and fell asleep. So I obviously thought this guy is not going to ask me any questions. He's falling asleep, right? And then somewhere in the middle he wakes up and asks me this really pointed question that completely stumped me, and I came this close to not having an MS and not having this class today, eventually, right? Because the guy is asleep, but he's still hearing. Everything else is working for him. There you go. So my sensing of Naveen Kanal's brain was useless. I could only see, and of course, that's why I'm telling you, my sensing is if you sleep or if you're looking at the cell phone, I will assume that you don't care about what I'm saying. I realize you're from a different generation, you can multitask and get all 100% of things, but please bear with my faulty models, faulty sensors. Okay? But eventually, a sensor, if it is wrong, it essentially gives you a set of states rather than a single state. Okay? And then, of course, the agent then is told, okay, you are in one of these 15 different states, and you still need to get to S17. Then the agent is going to have a harder time. In fact, then the agent can have two different kinds of plans. One plan that actually uses sensing actions to figure out what to do. Another plan which still somehow ramroads through the uncertainty of the state space to reach the goal. Okay? There's a children's rhyme that I used to sing to my son. And not singing, just need to, and that basically says, there are all these different animals, and some of them are sleeping, and some of them are not sleeping, and then the elephant basically, does its thing and yells at the top of the voice, and now you know completely what the state of all animals is. They're all awake. Okay, If you don't know whether a certain country has some kind of bombs or not, you can find out by actually going and checking or bombing the place. And after that, there's no country, there's no bombs. Okay? We do this as these are called conformant plans. And a friend of mine also calls them nonsense plans. And that's a technical term, by the way. Nonsense. You don't sense while doing planning.
That's what he tells you, at least.
Right? So that's the picture, basically. This agent has its own life, and it has actions can make its life hard, types of environments can make its life hard, types of perceptions can make its life hard, and types of goals also can make its life hard. Action. A goal normally is reach a state. All this stuff that I've been telling you till now is reach S97, reach S45, reach a particular state of affairs. And then after that, it doesn't matter how many toes you step on while reaching that state. If you reach that state, you get a badge. If not, you don't. But the real world is not at all like that. Even though you think, getting into a cab at Sky Harbor Airport and say, get me to my home, this is the address. That looks like a great goal of attainment. Just get me to my home. Believe me, you are not really thinking of it as a goal of attainment. You are assuming the cab driver would do same driving while getting you to home. If the cab driver is left and right cutting people off and jumping into trains and passengers and reaches your home, you would not give him a tip or her a tip. Forget about if you're still alive. Okay? Why? He can say, or he or she can say, I did get you to your goal. Why? Well, you got me through various states. Each of those states had rewards. And I added up all the rewards. There's a big reward for being at home. But there are also lots of negative rewards for going over little puppies and all sorts of things. And overall, my feeling is huge negative reward, which is what I'll give you, which is basically I'll mug you and take your money. Because, right? Okay, so the point I'm going to say is goals, the simplest kind of goals are goals of attainment, which is what you would like to deal with. But most real-world goals, there are no goals. You have reward functions. This is what people say, right? Especially when, like, for example, John McCain finally loses the presidential election, or one of the two guys is going to lose the election. Some, friend of theirs says, don't worry, it's the journey that matters. Especially when you lose, apparently journey matters a lot more than when you win. But it's, how do you make sense of journey mattering? Because there is no single goal. It's reward system. You go through various states, you collect rewards, and the total reward you get is some sort of a function of these individual rewards you get. That's the life you live. Right? Now, what did we do mostly in Intro to AI? Mostly in Intro to AI, we figured out how to deal with goals of attainment. I mean, most of you. Mine, of course, has gone some places farther, some places less, but every Intro to AI kid would know how to deal with goals of attainment, with deterministic actions, with static worlds, and with perfect perception. Those are hard enough problems, it turns out. Because I said that's the p-space complete problem. That you know how to do. If you, in fact, think of the celebrated A-star search, what does A-star search do? It starts with some initial state Si, thinks of doing different actions. A1 will get you to S2, A1 will get you to, S0. Okay. A1 will get you to S1, A2 will get you to S2, A3 will get you to S3, and so on, and then you consider other actions, other states, and essentially it's finding a path in this tree. It's finding the optimal path in this tree. The reason it's hard, is in 310 we know that this is graph search and it's only polynomial in the size of the graph. Only polynomial. And we thought in computer science we don't care about trying to improve polynomial time algorithms. What went wrong is the number of states
I've been talking about states as if they are indivisible entities. Okay? As if each snapshot of the world has its own unique identifier, like we have social security numbers. That's not true. Here is a state, now I'm here, it's a different state, now I'm here, it's a different state. Would you want to call them S59, S3555, S9985? You can, but then you miss the entire structure of the state space. All these states are extremely well connected. All of you are just the same place that you are, with the same look of interest or disinterest. And I'm dancing around. Right? Okay? So it should be easy to see that these states are connected. But if you just say that S15, S19, S35, you won't know the structure of the state space at all. So instead what we do in states, in representing states, is you represent them in the following different ways. The simplest way of representing state space is atomic, which is what I've been talking about till now without explaining the word atomic to you. An atomic state space or atomic model is where all states are indivisible. And the transition function, which is if you do this action in this state, you'll get to this other state, that's given directly in terms of the state numbers. And as I said, that loses a large amount of structure in the world. I just gave you this example. Basically, the states are exactly the same. I was dancing around. The rest of the 43 people were in the same exact place. It seems silly not to understand that. So one easy way of improving our representation is to say, in this room, the only variables that matter is the states of the various objects, including the people. So I define the state in terms of the values of each of these state variables. Okay, state variable 1, awake. State variable 2, sort of falling asleep. State variable 3, checking email. State variable 4, sort of. Okay, and state variable 5 in this place, and so on. So state variables with their values. Okay, at the simplest case, I can imagine that I have Boolean state variables. And you can, this is without loss of generality actually. I can basically say, for every property, I can make a Boolean state variable saying, this guy is sleeping, true, false. This guy is awake, true, false. So I can always write my state in terms of a set of state variables. So if I have n state variables, how many states am I talking about? 2 power n states. So all of a sudden, my state space is logarithmic in the size of the number of, the state space representation is logarithmic in the number of states. This is very important. We have, as much as you might think otherwise, we have very small brains. And rats have even smaller brains. Ants have really, really small brains. And yet, they get by. The world doesn't become smaller for ants and slightly more complex for you and so on. The world is what the world is. You see what I'm saying? And yet, each of these little critters, and your agent, the little agent that you bought with cheap hardware, still has to live in this world. How can it do it if it has to use atomic states? Just the size itself is going to kill it. So I'm telling you that if you have propositional representation, suddenly states are made of state variables, then all of a sudden you have more compact representation. You have a logarithmic reduction. And then you have relational representations where you realize that actually these are not just a bunch of propositions which are independent. This guy being awake, this guy taking notes, this guy, having his hand on his head. They're all about this guy. He's not going to sit here anymore next time. Right? And so it's object oriented. So there are objects. And the objects have properties. And this guy is talking to this guy. That's a relation between those two. If I write in terms of objects and their relations, then I get relational logic. Those representations are even smaller. And then finally, I can start first order
where essentially I even have functions. This guy is talking to his friend. The friend is a function. This guy is talking to his father. This guy is talking to his wife. All these, I don't tell you what the object is. Basically, I'm just giving you the function. Wife of this guy is the object I'm talking about. When you do all of this, the size of the model becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And so then you can actually, the problem is smaller in specification, but just because the problem is smaller in specification, it doesn't mean it's easier to solve. You know this, right? I mean, the longest questions are not the hardest ones. Sometimes the smallest questions are the hardest one. Just prove Fermat's last theorem, so small. And then you'll spend your lifetime. Right? So it actually turns out that one of the most interesting things, and we'll come back to this next time, is essentially you have to understand every problem at least at the atomic level. You need to understand deterministic planning, stochastic planning, non-deterministic planning, relational, reinforcement learning, belief space planning, everything first at the atomic level. But having understood at the atomic level, you want to keep trying to push your representation to propositional, relational, and first order representations, because that makes the model smaller and smaller. But they become compact, then the reasoning process that your agent uses, they'll be much more sophisticated algorithms. It's so much simpler to do atomic, but you don't want to do it because that requires very big brain, very large model. So what we'll do in this class, as I said, is we sort of understood in Intro to AI mostly how to deal with atomic models for deterministic change. Most of you understood that. A-star search is atomic models for deterministic change. If you did strips planning, you understood how to deal with propositional model with deterministic change. If you did Bayes network sorts of things, you did a little bit more. You did propositional models with uncertainty. Okay, when we come back next class, I will do MDPs, which are essentially the equivalent of A-star search for this course, which is a strict generalization of A-star search, where states are still atomic, actions are stochastic, goals are general, that means they are reward models, and perception is perfect. So MDPs are also called farm DPs, fully observable Markov decision processes. Fully observable, you know what state you are in. But you have stochastic actions, you have generalized goals. So when we come back next class, that's where we're going to start. We're just going to make stochastic actions and goals which are defined in terms of reward models. See you next time.